Everyone. Today is about leaky gut and dysbiosis. And you may have heard of the term leaky gut. It's also often called increased intestinal permeability. If you mention leaky gut to many conventional doctors, they'll think you're loopy. But for some reason, when you term it intestinal permeability, they go, oh yeah, that. Because that's something that they're familiar with, and it's usually the term that's used in research papers and that kind of thing. So I want to explain today exactly what leaky gut is and what can lie behind it, and specifically how this may be related to our consumption of certain foods. Now, if you think of our digestive tract like a big tube, all right, and this tube is lined with a thin layer of cells which have a really important job of forming a barrier between what's inside your body and what's outside. Now, if we're thinking of the digestive tract as a tube, then anything that's inside the tube is technically still outside the body. And the easiest way to think of this and to visualize it is to think of it like a tunnel under the ocean, okay? So you can walk through the tunnel completely dry without entering the ocean. And this is what foods do through our digestive tract. That wall of the tunnel is just a thin layer of cells, and that controls what gets through into the ocean, that is our blood and our tissues, and what doesn't, and what passes straight through. Now, the cells of this lining are all really tightly stacked together, all right? So if you think of them like this, they're joined by what's called tight junctions in between. I like to think of it, another visual for you, like a row of people all standing together, linking arms, all right? And those tight junctions are their linked arms that keep the cells nice and close and tight together. Those junctions are made up of proteins, and leaky gut occurs when those junctions and those proteins get a little bit lax and not as tight. So essentially you get these gaps between the cells. Now, these gaps affect the function of the gut in a few different ways. And firstly, it helps to know how a healthy digestion works to then see how it looks when things go wrong. Now, the foods within the digestive tract, a healthy digestive tract, are normally broken down into quite specific particles, quite small pieces that can be absorbed in very specific ways by those cells in the gut. So only certain types of proteins, carbs, and fats in the right sort of particles are ideally absorbed, along with other vitamins, minerals, and nutrients that the body needs. The gut has really specific mechanisms to let in only these required particles and keep out anything that might be damaging, including bigger particles that haven't quite been digested enough or haven't quite been broken down into smaller pieces yet, or other dangerous things like bacteria and viruses. So what happens when the gut lining is compromised and when that leaky gut occurs and it becomes not a healthy situation? Well, essentially, these absorption mechanisms just get all messed up, all right? Larger particles that haven't been digested properly, they can slip through those gaps in the cells, and this can cause immune reactions and inflammation. So the immune system sees these cells that look different to what they're normally used to seeing, and it will try and neutralize these. It'll think of them as an attacker, like it might be a bacteria or a virus that sneaks through. Your immune system will act on that in the same way and try to neutralize that substance. Then the inflammation occurs, all right, because that's what that immune system essentially sort of develops, as this inflammatory reaction. This inflammation is quite damaging to cells. So all the inflammatory chemicals that are produced actually do damage to our cells. They start to make proteins not work so well and oxidize certain molecules, and essentially just make the cells not work as well as they could do. So essentially that makes this whole situation worse, all right? This inflammatory reaction is there, and it's causing those cells that are already a little bit compromised to not work even more so. And what that means is that the absorption of certain vitamins and minerals, which actually they have to go through the cells, they have to pass through these certain mechanisms, that's also reduced because those cells just aren't working properly, so they can't let those particles through. So we end up with all the wrong things on the inside, and a lot of the things that we actually need that contribute to our good health, our vitamins and minerals, they're all stuck on the wrong side and they're unable to be absorbed properly. We end up with lots of inflammation, our immune system is activated, and we end up with nutrient deficiencies like vitamin and mineral deficiencies. The immune system activation also can contribute to allergies and intolerances to foods that are normally fine. So it's just like I mentioned that that immune system is not used to seeing those particles in that form. So it sees a bit of vegetable that you've just eaten for lunch, and while it would normally see that particle in its tiny little carbohydrate molecules that have been broken down nicely, it sees that in big chains and it goes, well, I don't recognize this. This must be something bad, when essentially it's just a bit of vegetable. That's kind of a very broad way of saying it, but it's that same sort of principle. So essentially, your immune system can mount reactions to normally harmless or normally healthy foods. And this essentially just causes more inflammation, more damage, and it truly is a vicious cycle. And you'll notice some people will say that they're reacting to foods that they've never reacted to before, or suddenly they just seem to be more allergic to more and more things. And this is what's happening, is that those particles are just sneaking through in the wrong forms due to that gut being leaky, and the immune system just seeing all these particles that it's not used to. So each time then after that immune reaction has been triggered, each time it sees that same food from then on, that immune system will be triggered, and those ordinary harmless foods start to become quite harmful. So what causes this leaky gut in the first place? This is the key, right? There is a lot of ongoing research about this and lots of different theories, and often it occurs when our gut bacteria get way out of balance. As the bacteria essentially lie on top of that layer of cells that's involved in that pathway between the digestive tract and the body. So that bacteria can act to protect that lining, and they can also produce chemicals or substances which help to improve and nourish the gut lining and improve the growth. So if that bacteria is out of balance, then often the gut lining will be compromised as well, because the two just are so closely related. Also, if we already have an intolerance or an allergy to a certain food and we eat them, then this immune reaction can initiate that inflammation, which can kick off the leaky gut process. So knowing what you're intolerant to can be really important for keeping a healthy gut. Or in situations where you are overreactive to certain foods, then working on your immune system and modulating that response and retraining the immune system is a really important part. There's also some other things that may contribute to leaky gut, such as medications, toxins, and in many people, gluten may cause this scenario too. Refined and processed foods that often have chemicals and additives or are just processed to forms that we're not normally used to seeing, these can be really inflammatory, and they can lead to gut imbalances and the inflammation as well. Naturally occurring phytonutrients, they're the antioxidants and the good nutrients found in plant foods, as well as really quality proteins and fats, can all help to reduce that inflammation and to improve the health of the gut. So if you're not having enough of those foods, then your gut may not be getting the nutrients that it needs to function well, and that can cause that imbalance in the first place too. Also, anything that promotes a healthy microbiome balance, a healthy gut bacteria balance, will ultimately improve the gut health by setting up that ideal environment for those cells to thrive and to reduce inflammation. That's why one of the main purposes of this program is to reduce your refined and processed carbohydrates in foods and improve your intake of the whole, fiber-rich, nutrient-dense foods to promote this anti-inflammatory environment and allow the gut to heal if it's damaged and stay healthy and function optimally. Now, Grains can be a big culprit for a lot of people, all right? There are anti-nutrients in there and substances like gluten, which can aggravate the gut and the immune system and can lead to gut disturbances in some people. Not everyone will be affected in this way, but if we can maximize the nutrient-dense foods and limit the ones that frequently cause problems, we can do a lot to help our gut health. There are some research studies that say things like gluten do actually cause temporary leakiness in just about every single person. All right. Now, these studies were done outside of the body, so not in a real life environment, in a lab environment where gluten was applied to cells of the gut lining. But that application did result in leakiness in just about every single sample that they tested. So that's why there is a lot of indication that gluten may be quite a big culprit. And also why people recommend a gluten-free diet when you've got gut issues, bloating, and other brain issues, which I will come to in another lesson in a couple of days' time, or a day or two. And I'll talk about how this scenario that we've just talked about, this gut microbiome imbalance and gut inflammation and leakiness, can affect our brain function as well. So stay tuned for that. I hope that's given you a nice little overview onto leaky gut and what it does and how it occurs. If you've got any questions about this, jump into the Facebook group, post your questions, and let me know, and I can explain a little bit further.